Hi friends, Mindy here. Welcome back to another installment of Bible journaling for beginners. This is going to be part 2, and today I want to talk about bleed through and page prep. These are some other really common questions that I see pop up a lot. I get them a lot anytime, with new mediums and inks and different things. We talked about a little bit of that before, and what I'm going to do is kind of go through, I'm going to start and I'm going to use the same Bibles that I shared in my previous video. And I want to kind of share kind of the evolution of how when I first started and different techniques and things. So I will say that now bleed through and shadowing, they don't really bother me. And there is a difference between bleed through and shadowing. So I want to talk about that really quick first. You will find most often that most things will shadow on the backside of a page. It's just kind of inevitable. Even just a page of text, you really, it really does have shadowing. You just don't notice it because there's a lot of other, there's something on both sides, so you don't see it as much, if that makes sense. And the degree of shadowing is really depending on the kind of product that you're using. So some things will shadow just a little bit, darker colors, more intense colors. They may shadow a little bit more, but not technically bleeding through. So bleeding through is really when the medium from the one side reveals itself basically on the back side. So you can have a light shadow and it not really be considered a bleed through. And at the very end of my last video, I mentioned, just testing all of your things out in the back of your Bible, because every Bible is different. And that's really what I want to show you sort of with the Bibles that I'm going to share today and some of the pages, is that some of the things that worked in this Bible don't have the same result in another Bible that I have, because this paper is a little bit thicker, especially in this particular Bible. This is one of my first journaling Bibles. And so some of the things that worked in here didn't work in other Bibles. And, the coating on the paper, some of the things, it's just a little bit different. So you really just are going to have to test it. And really, I think maybe more than worrying about what is going to bleed through, worry about, like, if it does bleed through, how can I fix it? Because that is really an important key too. But if you really do want to prevent any type of bleed through, there are a couple things that you can do. So I just going to show you really quickly back in here this is a page where I gessoed down this side so that I could test the way that some of these other things like inks and different things, some watercolors and stuff, would work on a gessoed surface. Because once you do some page prep, your mediums are going to react just a little bit differently than they would on a regular Bible page. So that's just something to note. And then I have, some different stamps that I use. This is like a stays on, and this is an archival. And then I have colored them in with, this was like a mermaid marker, which is really intense watercolor paint. And then the Gonzai Tombi, which is another watercolor. And I have some koi markers down here. Just tested all of that out, and you can kind of see. This is mostly shadowing, except like right there, I would say that's bleed through. And then over here, these are watercolors. And so most of that it just shadowed. You can kind of see a little bit of the color to the back side. And then this is funny. I found this today when I was looking for this video. I had written myself a note about some things that work particularly in this Bible for me, and talking about soft gel, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But so you can see I had even just tried out some things in the back. I have different pens. It just really made it. I have some more stamping here. I have archival, VersaFine. I'm not really sure what that one was, but you can see this one, I would say almost bled through. That one is shadowing. So it really just kind of depends on what your Bible looks like and different things. I will show you just by comparison really quickly. This is my ESV interleaved. I did just a little bit of a test just so you can kind of get an idea about the same thing. I tested archivals, a VersaFine, a distress ink, a distress oxide, and a stays on, just so you could kind of see. And they're all like I have varying amounts of bleed through and shadow on all of them. So I would say, a couple of these are shadow. I would say that's, stays on is definitely going to bleed through. And a lot depends on your ink pad as well, which is why I did this particular one. So this is my black soot archival ink, and this is my ground espresso archival, and this one is ink I use all the time. My ink pad is very, very dry, so I really need a new one. But you can see that one is really more like what I would consider a shadow instead of a bleed through. But if it was a brand new ink pad, probably would be worse. You can see here with the distress ink as in particular and the oxide, I stamped them and then I colored over them with a water brush, so you can kind of see like this. It wasn't too bad. When you add the water, it definitely is going to bleed through in this Bible. So there are ways though, if you are like me and you love distress inks and distress colors, there's ways that you can work around that too. So really quickly, let me just talk a little bit about ways that you can page prep. So what is page prep? That is literally what it sounds. You're just going to prepare your page for whatever you're going to put on top of it. You're basically creating a non-porous surface so that you can create on top and not have to worry about that. The only thing that you really wouldn't have to consider doing any type of page prep for would be acrylic paint. It is not going to bleed through. And the reason for that is because it stays on top. And so one of the ways that you can prepare your pages is to use a matte medium, and that is a liquid fluid medium that you paint on with a paintbrush. And the reason this works is basically this is an acrylic paint but without the pigments. It's, you know, the base of it is the same, and so you're basically creating, you know, it's acrylic, so it's almost like a plasticky surface over your page, and it's going to prevent anything from seeping through or bleeding through to the back. You still may even get some shadowing, but you're not going to get the actual bleed through with it. You can use matte, medium, the fluid. There's also soft gel. This is one of those things that I was mentioning. I had that note in there. You can do this. It's I'll just open this up so you can see if you haven't seen it. It's literally just a gel. You would apply this. This would probably be better applied with like a paint scraper where you can get a really even coat. And I would say too, if you're going to be prepping your pages, you probably want to do a couple of thin coats instead of just like one really heavy coat, just to make sure that you're getting a nice even coat all the way through. I'll show you one of the pages that I have done that where there was like just one little section. I was trying to page prep and I did one little section and it bled through anyway. And that was really kind of when I was like, why am I even bothering doing that? You know, it's fine. I'll just fix it later. So matte medium and soft gel. This one might not be as popular as a page prep. I have used it. I really like it because I like the finish of it when it dries, but it is a thicker medium to use. And then matte medium just going to go on like you would any other, like, you know, paint or whatever. Another option would be gesso. So if you want to be able to read all of your, you know, if you're doing your whole page and you want to be able to read your text, then you're going to want clear gesso. And several brands have this. This is Art Basics. They're, you know, you can get it. Liquitex, I have it in a couple different brands, but not all gessos are created equal either. Some of them are a little bit grittier. Some of them have a little bit more tooth to them because they're really a page prep or, you know, an art prep product. And so you kind of just have to figure out which ones that you like, but a clear gesso will work. You can also do a white gesso if you want to. I do have a couple of pages where I've done that. I will show you as well. So gesso is definitely a way to do that. Clear gesso will work. There's also another product that is called watercolor ground. I don't have any to show you, but it also comes in clear and in white, and it really just prepares your page so that if you're working with watercolors, if that's kind of your preferred medium, you can use that on your page. The only time that I would say that maybe I would use that would be in like an illustrating Bible, because the paper in there just doesn't take water as well as some of the other papers. But my other Bibles, I wouldn't even really consider needing any kind of watercolor ground in there because they take water pretty well. So with that being said, I'm going to start with my very oldest Bible. I'm just going to go through a few of the pages I have marked and a couple of, you know, just to show you what was in here. So this is a page where I prepared this with white gesso in the background. So you can see there is no bleed through. These are some of my early entries. This is back clear to 2017. And then I used some ink, some watercolor, and it just pools up a little bit differently on a gessoed surface than it would even on the page itself or on something like it just reacts a little bit differently when it's on a gessoed surface. And I actually was going for that look for this page. So that was why I used that one. This is another super early entry where I just did some music lyrics and then something that I had been praying about, and I just lettered some of the lyrics. And so you can see through here where I had some shadowing, and then where I worked over the pen a little bit, now I'm starting to get bleed through from it. So I was just, going over, because I had a small pen, like a thin tipped pen that I was using, a fine liner, and I was trying to make these downstrokes larger. And so in going over it multiple times, it started to give me just a little bit more of that. But I would just cover this up this next time. And some of these were in entries where by the time you put some artwork on the back side of this, you're not going to see all of this shadowing anyway. So this is one where I did have some bleed through. This is an old entry. This was, I think, some watercolor. And the problem with this was that I added a lot of water, and this page was really saturated. So you can kind of see some of it, I would say, maybe is more shadowing. Some of it's more bleed through. You could definitely incorporate this into a new design. You could cover it up with some white gesso. You could even cover it up with paper. I've done that as well in trying to cover up some of the things that I have done in here. This one is another one where I created just a watercolor background, and I was trying to blend and everything, and some of these colors were just really intense. You can see the level of shadow, and I don't know if I would call it necessarily bleed through. It's getting to that point, but definitely have some shadow, especially with those like deep dark blues. So this page is one where I covered the entire thing in matte medium, and it ends up giving the pages almost a plasticky kind of feel. But why I wanted to do with it on this particular page, I have this one section here that I just didn't color, but in the background I used actually the dual brush markers. And when you have them over a finish like this, it's like a non-porous surface, you have just a little bit of time to blend the color. So what I did, like particularly for this heart, is I sort of colored it, and then I would take my finger and I would just kind of rub it, and that's what actually gave the dimension to this heart, even though I was just really using one color. And because with those India ink markers, you do have just a little bit of time. They're permanent once they're dry, obviously, but you do have a little bit of time to kind of work with them. And that's I did a couple of pages that way. But then, I just did the bleed through. But you can see right here where I was going with the marker, that was the original color of the marker. But once I rubbed it out, it was lighter. So that was where I did not get my page prep all the way to the very top. So that was this is again another page that just had some watercolor bleed through. You can kind of see this is also an old tape runner. I was using like the mono line tape runners, and so you can see that it did some interesting kind of shadowing here on the back. A lot of those, I stopped using those because of what they were doing, because you could always see that strip. You didn't see it right away, but eventually you would kind of see it. And I'm not going in chronological order, I'm just going through cover to cover. So this is actually one of my first, I think, if not my first entry in this Bible. And again, I'm just doing some quote. This was a stencil that I used some oxide inks through. And for the most part, they're all oxide inks, and so, or distress inks, but most of it you don't see. But I had one color, which was the fossilized amber, and it was just super, super juicy, that particular ink pad. And so as soon as I hit that through my stencil, it's the part that bled through, but the other parts didn't. And so most people will tell you that distress inks will bleed through, but depending on how you do it, and if you're doing light layers, you may not get that through. So like some of these other layers that are in here, you don't see them shadowing or bleeding through at all. So it was really just this one that was super, super juicy, that one particular ink pad. And I'm going to share this page for a couple of reasons. One is to dispel the fact that we are all going to love every single page that we do in our Bibles. I do not like this page. I've mentioned this page in multiple videos that I've done showing this Bible. I do not like this page. This page did not turn out at all how I had hoped. And in trying to fix it and just trying to kind of constantly do what I could do, I made it just worse and worse, and finally I just had to walk away from it. So this is one that I did do page prep on. I did some matte medium because I was doing this tree and I wanted to be able to use those India inks, those dual brush markers, and do some of the blending. And it at one point, like I did not really like what I had at all. And I knew I had enough time that I could like kind of wipe the slate clean and start over. And I tried that, and then it just got worse from there. And so everything after that point was just an attempt to try to fix this page. And in the end, I just had to go, you know what, this was just a really good learning experience for me. And I'm sharing it with you here. So not my favorite page, but that's what it is. I was inspired by this artwork that I had seen with this tree, and it was like, you know, cascading over, and it was just very whimsical, and I loved it. And I was like, ooh, I want to create that. And yeah, it didn't work out. But this is one of those areas where I was saying, like, here, these are little areas where I did not have my matte medium all the way through. And so it ended up bleeding through. Again, it's not an issue. The text is still readable. But why I got so frustrated with this page is because the more that I did to fix it, the less and less I could read the page. And for me personally, whenever possible, especially at this time when I was first starting, it was very important to me to be able to read the Bible. Obviously now I have multiple Bibles, multiple journaling Bibles. These are not the Bibles that I study from. But I just still, even now, whenever possible, I do try to keep it as readable as possible. So anyway, it was just one of those pages. It just did not turn out, and it's okay. It happens to everybody, and you just have to embrace it as really a learning experience. So this one was watercolor. These were done from actually some sermon notes. And you can kind of see a little bit of shadowing is really more up in here where I stamped the banners, that I've got a little bit of shadowing. And then where I kept going over my writing, again, I got a little bleed through there. This one has some prep also. This is just a white gesso. And I was trying to remember if there was a reason why I did that, but I think it was because I wanted this look. I was really excited about how some of the inks and stuff would kind of pool up and just give you kind of a really dimensional look and you could just kind of drop the inks in, and it would just react in fun ways. And so that's what I was doing here. This is a very, very old page as well. And then this is a good example of what if you don't like what you did. So here I had drawn a lady, and I did not like how this looked at all. And you can see the kind of the shadow of her here. Just didn't like it at all. And so because my pages were nice and bright white, I just took some gesso, painted over this whole thing, and then started over. So pretty much everything can be fixed. Not everything, obviously. I showed you that last page, and then this is another one that has some watercolor, and I had a lot of water on this page too. Plus this is very, very intense color. And so I do have a lot of shadowing / bleed through, and you can kind of see down in here, I have some of the glue from this little image here is creating some lines on there. And this is a micron pen. You can kind of see it does shadow, but it didn't bleed through. And this was stamped, I'm assuming probably an archival ink there. And then this page was stamped with archival, these in particular. And then I think this was a really intense watercolor marker that I had. And so you can kind of see I have a little bit of shadowing, definitely some shadowing from that. And I would say, you might consider that more to be bleed through. It technically is shadowing, but it's just really intense because of the black. And then on this last page here, this is just done in watercolor. And so even here where I went over like multiple areas, you can see there's just a little bit more shadowing than in the other areas. So not enough to affect anything. And honestly, I think you could, if I journaled on this next page, I think I wouldn't even try to cover any of that up. I think just having something over the top. Sometimes it can look like, oh my goodness, there's so much that needs to be covered right here. But really, by the time you journal over the top of it, you're not going to be able to, you won't even really notice it. So that is that Bible. And I just want to share a couple of the different Bibles because like I said, everything sort of reacts differently in them. And so I'm going to save this other one. I'm going to flip through just a couple of these in the illustrating Bible, again, because the paper in this Bible is just a little bit different. So it's a little bit thicker paper. So in some senses, it reacts really well to certain mediums, but it does not react well to water. And so watercolor does not work as well on this. This is where one of those places where I would maybe consider a watercolor ground if you really want to do some watercoloring on there, because once you add some water, everything starts to pill, like the actual paper. So this was an oxide ink through a stencil here in the background. And you can kind of see just barely a little bit of shadowing. So in terms of that, it was great. But if you add water, that's where you kind of run into some problems, especially if you're trying to really like blend your colors with a watercolor. So this one has a little bit of shadowing, you can see right here, and that's really from me drawing those lines there. And then again, this is an oxide that through a stencil. So part of it is going to be, the difference between taking a rubber stamp and using an ink, like a distress ink or an oxide ink, and stamping it down on your page. You're going to get a different look than if you're taking a stencil with like a makeup applicator and blending it through. You're going to have way less bleed through doing that way, because it's just not as intense. So everything kind of has more to do with, I won't say more to do. There are some things that are just automatically going to bleed through, like a StazOn ink. Alcohol inks like Copic markers and all that, they're just going to bleed through. But some of it, you know, there are just ways that you learn to work around it, especially if you have a favorite medium. So this is another oxide ink that was done with a blender brush, and you can see because it's just a lighter color and it was just lightly done in layers, it didn't bleed through at all. Here's another version, like where that background is kind of done similarly. And I think the stamping that I did here must have either been an archival or possibly an oxide, because it looks like right here starting to oxidize just a little bit. So that might have been like ground espresso in archival ink. And then you can kind of see just a little bit of shadowing on the back of that. But this is what I'm talking about. You can kind of see it really well here on this, that even the text shadows through. So, you know, you are going to get some shadowing in the things that you do. I don't know that there's anything else I really want to share in there, but I will say, you know, these are great. The paper is a little bit thicker, so that's really nice. But again, just know that if you're going to use water with it, you might want to work with it in a different way. So the next one that I want to go through is my ESV interleaved. And well, actually, let me just go through this one really quick too. This is just a little tiny one. And I just want to show you, like, these are some distress oxides as well. And this paper is it just reacts a little bit differently. So again, here's some watercolor. This was actually done with distress crayons and a baby wipe. So you can, if you like the color palette of distress, there are ways that you can work with it as well. But don't be afraid of bleed through and those kinds of things. It's going to happen. And there's always a fix for it. So this is a page that I did with some watercolor here in the background. And you can kind of see the thing that you're actually seeing shadow here is the backside of this pattern paper that I have glued down. So not actually the watercolor, it's the pattern paper that you're seeing. This is acrylic paint, so obviously you're not going to see any bleed through from this. And then I will say this is a like a metallic paint. The shinier your paints are, the more you may have trouble with the page sticking to, because it just has like a more tacky finish to it, which is, by the way, a reason why I would not use Mod Podge as a page prep. I know a lot of people really love Mod Podge, but for me, it's not a very good product for where I live because it's very humid here. And so I feel like everything just always stays tacky. Mod Podge is not my favorite. And so you'll find that with like glossier paints sometimes can do that same thing. There are workarounds for that too, but just be kind of aware, like there was a line of paint from Target called the Handmade Modern paints or whatever, and they were just a little bit shinier, and sometimes that just created a little bit of problem. But most acrylic paints I haven't had any problem with, and I actually like using acrylic paint in my journaling because, again, you don't really have that issue. This one looks like it was stamped, but I actually stamped on tissue paper and collaged it down. I didn't mark this Bible, so I'm just gonna have to flip through. This has some oxide in the background that's stamped. You can barely see it, but it's a light color anyway. I don't know that, even if it was bleeding through, I don't know that you'd see it all that much. This is another page where I have done page prep in this one. It was kind of that same idea. So there's some acrylic over the top of this. And then this is actually not bleed through. This is just me being messy at painting when I'm painting things. And then I have, you know, some texture paste. I did some collage with some book text and some hymnal. And then I used that same technique with those dual brush markers to create some of the shadowing. So because I had gone over this whole page with matte medium, I was able to just go in there and do that technique with just to get the shading. So this one is watercolor, and then this has some, this is actually embossed with like an embossing glaze. So you can see there's no bleed through there. This page has a little bit of, this is going to be an oxide ink that I used a stencil. So you can kind of see a little bit of shadowing, but it's not anything that really, even by the time you worked on this page, you'd never know on the other side. This one actually is a watercolor background, and then I stamped over the top of it with an oxide. And so you can see where I've got the bleed from that. And this is one of those pages where I would either just, because these are like a cream colored paper, I may not use a white gesso here, but there are ways that you could like just add in some paper or some pattern paper or whatever, or, you know, find a way to kind of cover it up. So it doesn't, the bleed through doesn't really bother me. And this is one of those ways too, that when I first did this page, I have an oxide background, and then I did some texture paste that I believe I colored with an distress product of some kind. I don't remember, but you can kind of see on this page where it has bled through, like you can kind of see some of the, it shows as yellow, which is really interesting, but it's from that, the stencil of this tree, but it's kind of in the background here, but you don't, I mean, it's not really super obvious. And so at the time when I did this page, I didn't see all of that, but I think that just kind of happened over time, which was really interesting. But here's another one. You can kind of see the bleed through here, but this is oxide ink that I just went through a stencil. And then this same here, this stamping is the thing that is really going to show through on the back in that dark line. I don't remember if that was a VersaFine or an archival, but again, I just wasn't really all that concerned with it. So because I know that I can cover it up. So having those pages where I was like, okay, I've created a problem for myself and now I need to fix it, just kind of teaches you things. So sometimes, you know, just having the experience and like trying all of the things and seeing what works and seeing what doesn't work is just a valuable exercise. Even if, you know, maybe you end up with a page that's not 100% what you want. You've learned how your Bible works and how your Bible reacts with the products that you enjoy using. So here's a page where you can see absolutely my stamp came through. This was done with VersaFine, and I knew that it was going to do that, and I just wasn't worried about it. This is a watercolor background and then some oxide stenciling on there. And I've been not working in this Bible very often in the last couple of years because it's really kind of full and I need another one. And I have been really working in journals quite a bit. And so usually I can only get a few kits of like By the Will for God devotionals in here because I do all 14 days. So they fill up fast, which is why a lot of times I will work in a journal. This is a page where you can see a lot of the shadowing from the collage that I did, but I collaged some music paper in the background and went over that with some paint. So what you're actually seeing is the shadowing of that music paper. And then I have some oxide inks stenciled through the back of this. And again, what you're seeing is like the glue that I used and really nothing else. So this was actually a full page of pattern paper. This is another one where I stenciled with oxide inks. Pretty light-handed with it, but you can see maybe a little bit of shadowing here, but nothing major and nothing that certainly you couldn't work on the other side. So here's another page where I just added in some of the pattern paper. This is another page, and I have some stenciling, probably some oxide in there. And then on the back side of this is a pattern paper. So it just covers up anything that would have bled through anyway. So Again, here's another one. This is a really old one as well. All that is watercolor. And then I have some watercolor and some stenciling on the back of this one. Again, you can't really see anything there. And so everything just really kind of reacts a little bit differently. There's some stamping here in the back with an archival ink, so you can see the bleed through from that. That was when my ink pad was much newer than it is now. Here you can see a little bit of stamping as well. That is from an oxide ink in the background on there. And then these are just kind of some splatters, so you can kind of see it shadowed a little bit, but nothing really major. Trying to not take up too much time. So you see here, again, what you see there is the stamping from, I'm thinking this is actually an archival in gray that I have, but it could have been an oxide ink. But either way, if you're stamping with an oxide ink, you're gonna get a more intense color there, and so you might get some more bleed through or shadowing than you would if you're like taking lightly through a stencil. So this is watercolor in the background. I think this is actually distress crayon that I use like a baby wipe with. That's a really fun technique that I really love to do on Bible pages. Down here as well, you can see I had the little stenciling of this film strip up here at the top. And so when I went to do this page, I obviously had bleed through from this that I wanted to cover. So I just have a little piece of paper, you know, scrapbook paper up at the top, or pattern paper. So there are ways that you can work around it. Again, here's some watercolor. You can kind of see that didn't bleed through at all. Those are just kind of a lighter hand. And then again, stamping with, I think that's pumice stone. And so you can kind of see it shadow through a little bit there. But again, I hope that this really answers the question. Really, whether you page prep or not is really up to you and personal preference. I have just through the years kind of gotten away from it. If I know maybe that I want to do something specifically that's going to bleed through a lot, I might actually work on a separate page and then put that into my Bible instead of, you know, a lot of times that's what I will do with stamping in particular, is like if I want to stamp out a title or something like that, I'll stamp that on separate paper or on a pattern paper like you just saw, and then I'll add that into my Bible instead of stamping directly into my Bible. And sometimes I'm not a very good stamper in my Bible anyway. And a title is one of those things that's like really important that you can read it. When it's a distressed background, that's not so important. But if it's like a title, I want to make sure that you can read it. But anyway, in terms of bleed through and page prep, I hope that this answers your question. Feel free to leave any further questions that you have about maybe some other episodes that you would like to see about some tips and tricks for beginners. I do have a list going from some of the input that I've received both on Instagram and in my last video. Feel free to leave any of those questions or comments down in the description or in the comments section down here. And if you liked this video, I would really appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And until next time, bye.